The moment I spotted the tents sprawled across my south pasture, I knew something insane was about to unfold. You expect to find deer grazing or maybe a few wayward cattle, not a full-blown neighborhood camping trip, complete with barbecues, boom boxes, and a shrieking woman waving a clipboard like a battle flag. At first, I thought maybe a group of lost hikers had stumbled onto my land. But then I saw the banners. Handwritten signs flapping in the wind proudly announced HOA Annual Retreat, like they had rented a conference center instead of trespassing onto a working ranch. Before I could even park my ATV and swing a leg off, a woman stomped toward me, hands on her hips with the righteous fury of a queen defending her kingdom. Her bright pink sun visor and massive sunglasses did nothing to soften the venom in her voice as she barked, "You are not authorized to be here, sir. This is a reserved area for HOA members only." I blinked, stunned, thinking she must be joking. I owned every square inch of this land. Before I could open my mouth to explain, she whipped out her cell phone and started shrieking into it about a dangerous man threatening peaceful families at their community event. Within seconds, she was dialing 911, describing me like I was an armed intruder instead of the landowner. That was the exact moment I knew this was not going to be an ordinary Saturday. I stayed mounted on my ATV, watching her parade up and down the field like she was leading an army. Behind her, families were setting up folding chairs and inflatable kiddie pools right next to my hay barn. Some kids were even poking sticks at my livestock fence, giggling as the cows nervously backed away. I had spent years building this ranch from nothing, pouring sweat into every fence post, every irrigation line, every blade of grass. To see it treated like a public park buffet made my blood simmer, but I kept my temper in check because I knew how these situations went. You yell once, and suddenly you are the bad guy, even when it's your name on the deed. Karen, as I had already mentally named the visor woman, strutted back over to me with her phone still pressed to her ear. "Help is on the way," she snapped, as if she had just saved the world. "Who gave you permission to camp here?" I asked as calmly as I could. She looked at me like I had 3 heads. "The HOA board," she said proudly, as if she had dropped the name of the president himself. "We voted and this is common land now. It's for the benefit of the neighborhood." I'd almost laughed but managed to choke it down. Common land? That would have been hilarious if it weren't so insulting. This was private property, 3 miles outside the nearest housing development, and the only commonality about it was that it commonly belonged to me and nobody else. Minutes later, I heard the faint whine of sirens in the distance, getting louder fast. Karen smirked and clapped her hands like she had just summoned an army. "You better get off this land before you get arrested," she chirped. Her followers, emboldened by the approaching sirens, cheered and waved their solo cups in the air like it was a tailgate party. I stayed put, arms crossed, eyes squinting into the sunlight, waiting. I had no intention of running from my own land. If anything, I was curious how deep Karen was willing to dig her own grave. 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled up in a cloud of dust, lights flashing. The deputies stepped out slowly, hands resting lightly on their belts, taking in the chaotic scene of tents, grills, and toddlers chasing chickens through the pasture. Karen sprinted toward them like a sprinter going for Olympic gold. "Officers," she cried dramatically, pointing at me. "That man is harassing us. He is a danger. He is ruining our HOA retreat." I watched the deputies exchange a look, one eyebrow arching higher than the other. The lead deputy, a grizzled man with a weathered face and kind eyes, scanned the area. Then his gaze landed squarely on me. His face split into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be," he chuckled, "if it isn't the king of the ranch himself. How you doing, Jackson?" Karen's jaw hit the dirt. "You know him," she gasped. The deputy laughed and clapped me on the back. "Known him 20 years, he said cheerfully. "This here's his land, ma'am. Has been since before most of y'all even moved out here." Karen stuttered, stammered, then tried to recover by pulling out a stack of papers from her fanny pack. "Our bylaws give us access to natural spaces," she insisted, waving the papers wildly. The deputy took one look and snorted. "Ma'am, HOA rules stop at your property lines. You cannot just annex somebody else's ranch because you want a weekend getaway." Karen's face turned a fascinating shade of red, somewhere between fire engine and ripe tomato. She opened her mouth, probably to launch another barrage of nonsense. But the deputy held up his hand. "I'm going to give you folks a chance to leave peacefully," he said, real firm now. "Pack it up, clear out. No fines, no arrests. But if you stay after being told, it becomes criminal trespass, and we start hauling people off to jail." Karen was trembling with rage, visibly torn between obeying the law and her overwhelming desire to win. Behind her, the campers had started whispering, casting nervous glances at each other. A few were already yanking tent stakes out of the ground and tossing gear back into SUVs. The tide was turning, and Karen knew it. She rounded on me one last time, jabbing a finger in my direction. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You will hear from our lawyers." I smiled, slow and wide. "I sure hope so," I said, because I got a few calls to make myself. As Karen stormed off in a spray of dust and wounded pride, I swung back onto my ATV and watched the trespassers scatter like ants. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. People like Karen never went down without a few more rounds of chaos, and this time, I was ready for whatever storm she wanted to unleash. The dust had barely settled after the last of the trespassers packed up their things when I spotted Karen lingering near the old oak tree by the fence line. While most of the other campers had the good sense to leave quietly, shamefaced and muttering apologies under their breath, Karen stayed planted like a statue, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had personally ruined her dream vacation. I could see her pacing back and forth, furiously punching things into her phone. I wasn't worried, though. I had the law, the land deeds, and common sense on my side. It was only a matter of time before reality caught up with her delusions. Or so I thought. Less than an hour later, the stillness of the ranch was shattered by the sight of Karen marching up the dirt driveway with a group of people trailing behind her like ducklings. Some of them were carrying clipboards. Others were holding what looked suspiciously like printouts of official-looking documents. I leaned against the fence and waited, watching the parade approach with a mix of amusement and disbelief. Karen stopped about 20 feet away, planted her feet wide apart, and held up a sheath of papers as if she were serving a royal proclamation. "I hereby inform you," she announced, loudly enough to startle the crows out of the trees, "that under the newly amended HOA bylaws, this area is now considered an extension of the community green space." She paused, clearly waiting for some kind of reaction. When I simply raised an eyebrow, she pressed on. "Therefore, you are in violation by occupying common property without HOA consent, and you are ordered to vacate immediately." Behind her, a few of her followers nodded vigorously, like they actually believed this nonsense. I crossed my arms and said nothing, giving her just enough rope to hang herself. Karen, thinking she had stunned me into submission, stepped closer and shoved one of the papers toward me. It was a grainy black and white map with a giant hand-drawn circle around my property and the words HOA territory scribbled across it in Sharpie. I almost laughed out loud but managed to keep a straight face. "Ma'am," I said slowly, just so there's no confusion, "you cannot just claim somebody else's land because you feel like it. This is private property. It has always been private property, and your HOA has no jurisdiction outside of your development." Karen's face twisted into something halfway between rage and smugness. "You will regret underestimating us," she hissed. "We have legal resources. You have been warned." With that, she spun on her heel and marched back to her group, barking orders like a general organizing an invasion. I decided it was time to make my next move before things got even more ridiculous. I spent the afternoon documenting everything. I took photos of the damage they had already caused. Broken sections of fencing where kids had climbed, deep ruts in the field from vehicles, piles of litter scattered near the pond. I called my lawyer, Ellie, a no-nonsense rancher's daughter who had been itching for a good case like this for months. After explaining the situation, she laughed and told me not to worry. She would draft a formal cease and desist notice first thing in the morning and have it hand-delivered to Karen herself. I thanked her and hung up, feeling confident. Later that evening, Just as the sun was slipping behind the hills and casting everything in gold and purple light, I heard shouting again from the south pasture. Curious but cautious, I saddled up my ATV and rolled down the dirt path to see what fresh madness was unfolding. To my amazement, Karen and her crew were erecting new tents, bigger ones this time, along with folding tables and even what looked like a portable stage. Somebody was setting up speakers and running extension cords across the grass, plugged into a portable generator humming away beside one of the trucks. It wasn't just camping now. It was a full-blown event. I drove up slowly, stopping a good distance away to avoid escalating anything. Karen saw me immediately and stormed over. Her visor, now replaced with a glittery captain's hat that made her look like the world's angriest cruise director, thrust a laminated badge into my face that read HOA Event Coordinator. "We are not leaving," she said smugly. "This is a sanctioned community event. Your presence is no longer required." I stared at her, genuinely amazed at the depths of her delusion. "You were told to leave," I reminded her. "The sheriff told you. The law told you. This is private land. Trespassing is a crime. You really want to escalate this?" Karen's lips curled into a grin that sent a chill down my spine. "I have already filed a restraining order against you," she said sweetly. "You are now legally required to stay 100 yards away from any HOA member during official activities. If you come any closer, I can have you arrested." I blinked, momentarily speechless. It was like arguing with a brick wall that could yell back. A restraining order against me, on my own land? That was her master plan. My mind raced, thinking through the implications. I knew it would never hold up in real court. But if the local deputies came back and saw a paper filed with the county clerk, even a bogus one, they would be obligated to act until a judge threw it out. Karen had found a way to weaponize bureaucracy against me, at least temporarily. I clenched my jaw and fought down the urge to tear down every one of their stupid tents myself. That was what she wanted. She was goading me into a mistake. I needed to stay calm and outsmart her. I turned my ATV around slowly and rode back to the ranch house, thinking hard. Karen thought she had won a battle today. She thought she was clever, that she had found a loophole. But what she didn't realize was that she had just handed me the biggest legal advantage yet. Because by filing that restraining order, she had officially admitted, on public record, that she knew she was on land she did not own. That meant every tent peg, every lawn chair, every footprint was documented trespass. I parked my ATV by the barn, pulled out my phone, and started making calls. If Karen wanted to play hardball, fine. I would bring the whole toolbox. By the time the sun rose tomorrow, she was going to wish she had packed up her circus and left when she had the chance. This wasn't just about fences and fields anymore. It was about principle, about standing up for what was rightfully mine. And I was ready to fight smart, ready to fight with everything I had. Because the ranch wasn't just my land. It was my life. And I wasn't about to let some HOA tyrant rewrite history with a laminated badge and a Sharpie map. The next morning, I woke up early, well before the first hints of sunlight stretched across the horizon. I couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be pivotal. Last night, after everything had settled down, I had gone through every document I could find on my property boundaries, ownership rights, and the local land use code. I even dug up a copy of the original land survey from when my grandfather had bought the ranch decades ago. I needed every piece of proof lined up because I knew Karen wasn't going to back down easily. She had tasted a little victory with that ridiculous restraining order, and people like her only got more dangerous when they thought they had the upper hand. As I drank my coffee on the porch and watched the mist rolling over the fields, I decided it was time to stop playing defense. It was time to take back my land on my own terms. I called the sheriff's office first thing, explaining the situation carefully. The deputy who answered was sympathetic, but explained that unless I caught them in the act of committing a new crime or could show immediate danger, they were reluctant to get involved again without a judge's explicit order. That suited me just fine, because I had a different plan forming in my mind, one that would make it crystal clear they were not welcome without laying a single finger on them. I spent the next few hours prepping the ranch like a man setting a trap, not for harm, but for undeniable proof. First, I checked the water system. Years ago, I had installed an underground sprinkler system designed to irrigate the lower pastures during dry spells. Most of the sprinklers were hidden in the grass and operated on timers. With a few adjustments, I reprogrammed the system to activate manually with full pressure and cover the entire south pasture where Karen and her followers had pitched their tents. It was harmless, just water, after all, but enough to make camping a miserable experience. I grinned to myself as I imagined the chaos that was about to unfold. Around noon, I hopped on my ATV and made a slow loop around the property line, documenting everything with my phone. Karen and her little army were in full swing now. They had set up a row of buffet tables covered in salads, burgers, and pies. Someone had even brought a cotton candy machine. Kids were running wild, tearing up the fields, while adults lounged in camping chairs, drinking soda and blaring music from massive portable speakers. It looked less like a retreat and more like a cheap festival thrown in the middle of nowhere. Karen, now wearing a sash that said HOA Queen in glitter letters, caught sight of me riding along the edge of the property and pointed dramatically. "He is stalking us again," she screeched. "Somebody call the sheriff." I kept my distance, stayed silent, and kept filming. That was important. I couldn't give them anything they could twist into aggression. I needed to be the calm one, the reasonable one, while Karen dug herself deeper into madness. When I was satisfied I had enough footage, I rode back up to the barn, parked, and activated the sprinkler system with the press of a button. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Hidden nozzles popped up from the ground with a hiss, and high-pressure jets of freezing cold well water erupted into the air. Within seconds, the south pasture was transformed into a muddy, soaking mess. Tents collapsed under the force of the spray. Plates of food were sent flying. Screams and shouts filled the air as adults and children alike ran for cover, slipping and sliding in the growing pools of mud. Karen stood in the middle of it all, drenched from head to toe, clutching her glittery sash like it was a life preserver. She tried to bark orders over the chaos, but nobody was listening anymore. Her subjects had abandoned ship. I stayed where I was, arms folded, watching from a safe distance. It wasn't just satisfying, it was necessary. They needed to understand that this land was not theirs to trample. Karen finally stumbled her way out of the spray and marched straight toward me, soaked, muddy, and furious beyond reason. "This is assault," she shrieked. "You are assaulting innocent families." I smiled politely and pointed at the sign mounted on the fence. "Private property. Trespassers will be soaked." I had added it last night as a little joke, but now it served as a perfect defense. Karen tried another tactic. She pulled out her phone and started live streaming, narrating dramatically about how an evil land baron was terrorizing hard-working HOA families. I just smiled wider and kept filming her antics right back. Every lie she spun was another nail in her coffin, especially when one of the drenched campers stomped past her muttering about how he had told her this was a bad idea from the start. The cracks in her army were starting to show. As the afternoon wore on, more and more of her followers packed up and left. Trucks and SUVs rolled down the dirt road in a steady exodus. By sunset, only a handful of die-hard loyalists remained, clustered miserably around a single damp table like survivors of a shipwreck. Karen was red-eyed, furious, but still refusing to admit defeat. She spent most of the evening stomping around with her clipboard, taking notes and muttering about lawsuits and media coverage. I let her stew. I knew her options were running out fast. That night, as I sat by the fireplace with my dog, Buck, curled up at my feet, I received an email from Ellie. Attached were the formal trespass notices, complete with photo evidence, timestamps, and witness statements from a couple of neighboring ranchers who had seen the circus from the road. We would be filing in the morning. Karen had crossed every line she could, and now the consequences were coming whether she liked it or not. Still, I couldn't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. Most people, when caught trespassing, would apologize, pack up, and leave with their dignity intact. Karen chose to escalate at every opportunity, digging herself into a hole so deep she might never find her way out. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: the battle for the ranch was just getting started. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was fighting to make sure that people like Karen never thought they could bully or cheat their way into stealing something that didn't belong to them. Not now. Not ever. The morning sun had barely started warming the fields when I made my way into town, feeling a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. Anger because Karen had pushed the situation so far beyond what should have been simple common sense. Satisfaction because I finally had everything lined up to hold her accountable in a way she couldn't weasel out of. In the passenger seat next to me sat a thick folder packed with documents, photos, land surveys, and sworn statements. It felt like carrying a loaded weapon. Only this weapon was legal, and every shot fired would be clean and precise. I pulled into the county courthouse parking lot, grabbed my folder, and walked through the big glass doors with a steady step. Today was about more than just winning. It was about principle. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with the usual Monday morning business. People filed paperwork, argued quietly in corners, shuffled nervously outside of courtrooms. I spotted Ellie near the clerk's office, her sharp business suit immaculate, her smile razor thin. She waved me over, and we went through the paperwork together one final time, double-checking every page. When we were satisfied, she slid the entire packet across the counter to the clerk, who stamped each document with a heavy thud. There it was, official. Karen and her group were now formally charged with criminal trespass, destruction of property, and nuisance violations. A civil suit for damages would follow once the criminal side wrapped up. Ellie also handed over copies of my restraining order appeal, set to be reviewed by a judge later that week. Karen's flimsy attempt at painting me as the aggressor was about to fall apart under the weight of real evidence. With the filings complete, I walked back outside feeling lighter. The wheels of justice might turn slowly, but once they start grinding, they're hard to stop. I figured Karen was still clinging to her fantasy of victory back at the ranch, probably plotting her next absurd move. What she didn't know yet was that by the end of the day, she would be served formal papers requiring her to appear in court. No more games, no more fake HOA rules, no more Sharpie maps, just the cold, hard reality of the law. As predicted, when I got back to the ranch, Karen was still camped out with a handful of loyalists. Their numbers had dwindled dramatically. The once bustling campsite now looked pitiful, with sagging tents, scattered trash, and muddy ruts carved into the field. Karen spotted me driving up the main road and immediately stormed toward the fence, waving a stack of papers like they were weapons. "You are going to jail," she screeched. "We have filed an emergency injunction. You will be removed by force if necessary." I stayed seated in my truck, letting her rant, recording everything with my dashboard camera. It was like watching a toddler throw a tantrum after realizing nobody was coming to their tea party. About 20 minutes later, a county deputy rolled up the driveway, lights flashing but no siren. Karen puffed up with excitement, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Here it comes," she shouted to her followers. "Justice." The deputy stepped out, adjusted his hat, and walked straight past her to me. "Afternoon," he said politely. "Got some papers for you. Standard notification for a court hearing regarding that restraining order. Also separate notice for the countersuit you filed. Here are your copies." He handed me 2 neatly folded packets, tipped his hat, and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, can I see you for a moment?" Karen strutted forward like she was being crowned queen. The deputy pulled out another set of papers and said calmly, "You are being served. Court summons regarding criminal trespass, nuisance violations, and property damage. Failure to appear will result in a bench warrant." Karen's face froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You cannot be serious." She finally managed to choke out, "I am the victim." He shrugged, clearly having heard it all before. "Tell it to the judge, ma'am." The mood shifted instantly. Her remaining supporters started packing up faster than ants fleeing a flooded anthill. Karen shouted after them, pleading, threatening, cajoling, but nobody wanted to stick around for what was coming. I watched from my truck, a strange calm settling over me. It wasn't about gloating. It was about finally seeing consequences catch up to actions. Real, undeniable consequences. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, court appointments, and preparations. Ellie worked fast and clean, anticipating every argument Karen might try to throw up as a smokescreen. On the day of the first hearing, I wore my best jeans and a clean button-down shirt, looking every bit the hard-working rancher who just wanted to protect his land. Karen showed up wearing a power suit 2 sizes too small and dragging a rolling suitcase stuffed with binders. She strutted into the courtroom like she was on a reality TV show, waving to the few reporters who had bothered to show up after hearing rumors about the case. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The proceedings began with the restraining order issue. Karen's lawyer, a tired-looking man who probably regretted taking her case, argued that I had harassed and intimidated innocent citizens exercising their right to public land access. Ellie stood up calmly and produced the land deeds, surveys, video footage, and sworn statements showing Karen trespassing, building structures without permission, and refusing lawful orders to leave. The judge barely let Karen's lawyer finish before slamming down his gavel and declaring the restraining order dissolved immediately. Next came the trespassing charges. Karen tried to argue that HOA bylaws superseded local property laws, a claim so ridiculous the judge actually leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead like he was fighting a migraine. When Ellie pointed out that Karen's HOA was located several miles away and had no jurisdiction beyond its own neighborhood fences, the judge looked ready to throw her out of the building entirely. In the end, Karen was found guilty of trespass and nuisance violations. She was ordered to pay damages for the property destruction, clean up the mess her group had left, and perform 100 hours of community service at the local animal shelter. The best part came when the judge handed down a final ruling regarding access to the private roads leading to her neighborhood. Since they had used the private ranch roads without permission during their little expedition, and since maintenance of those roads was legally mine, the HOA would now have to pay a monthly maintenance fee to continue using the access roads. In other words, Karen's HOA would be cutting me a check every month, indefinitely. Karen's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. It was a small miracle she didn't faint on the spot. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, I couldn't help but smile. The battle was over, and the land had won. Not because I yelled the loudest or acted the meanest, but because I stood my ground, stayed smart, and trusted the truth to do the heavy lifting. Karen might have strutted in thinking she could rewrite the rules, but in the end, the land, the law, and a little stubborn patience had delivered a lesson she would never forget. The days that followed the court ruling felt like a long, slow exhale after holding my breath for a week. The ranch returned to its normal rhythm, the cows grazing peacefully, the wind rustling through the tall grass, and the scent of fresh earth rising in the morning air. There were no more strange tents, no more shouted threats across the fields, no more blaring music disrupting the peace. It was as if the land itself had sighed in relief along with me. But the best part was not just the return to normalcy. It was watching Karen endure the consequences she had fought so hard to deny. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing justice unfold, not in sudden explosions, but in quiet, steady steps that left no room for argument. Karen was ordered to begin her community service within 2 weeks of the ruling. The local animal shelter had taken great pleasure in accepting her assignment. The director, a grizzled old cowboy type with a sharp wit and no patience for nonsense, made it clear from day one that Karen would be doing the dirtiest, most thankless jobs they had: cleaning out kennels, hauling bags of feed, scrubbing floors, and walking the meanest dogs in the midday heat. Rumor had it she tried to quit on the first day, throwing one of her signature tantrums in the middle of the shelter. But the shelter director simply crossed his arms and said, "Fine, walk out, and we'll call the judge and let him know you refuse to comply." That shut her up fast. After that, she showed up every morning, her posture stiff, her face set in a permanent scowl, doing her best to avoid eye contact with anyone. Meanwhile, the HOA she once ruled like a queen was not doing much better. Word had spread like wildfire about what had happened. People who had once whispered about Karen behind closed doors were now openly mocking her at town meetings and local events. The HOA board, desperate to distance themselves from her disaster, voted to strip her of her title and banned her from holding any leadership positions ever again. It was a stunning fall from grace, and Karen felt every inch of it. I saw her once at the grocery store, pushing a cart full of discount canned goods, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses and a ball cap pulled low. She ducked her head and practically sprinted out of the store when she spotted me. I didn't even bother to hide my smile. One of the small but steady victories came in the form of the new access fees. Every month, like clockwork, a check arrived from the HOA treasury, payable to me for the maintenance of the private road they had so carelessly abused. I used the first few checks to pay for repairs to the damaged sections of fencing and to regrade the rutted dirt paths they had torn up. After that, I decided to put the money to good use by upgrading the ranch's security. I hired Hank, a local contractor, to install a proper gated entrance, complete with surveillance cameras and motion sensors. Now anyone who tried to wander onto the property without permission would be caught on camera before they even made it halfway up the driveway. The new gate was a beauty. Heavy steel framed with rough cedar beams, it swung open with the press of a remote button and closed with a satisfying finality that made my heart lighter every time I heard it. I mounted a large, clear sign next to it that left no room for misunderstanding. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. No exceptions. It felt like the final touch, the last piece of armor sealing the ranch from any future invasions. But perhaps the sweetest moment of all came a few weeks after the dust had settled. The county fair rolled around, a big event that brought the entire community together for food, games, livestock shows, and more laughter than anyone could count. I was walking through the fairgrounds, a hot dog in one hand and a lemonade in the other, when I stumbled across the scarecrow competition. Each year, locals built creative scarecrows to compete for prizes and bragging rights. This year, one scarecrow stood head and shoulders above the rest, both literally and figuratively. There, proudly displayed in the center of the judging area, was a scarecrow dressed in a glittery sash that read HOA Queen. It wore oversized sunglasses, a pink sun visor, and clutched a laminated clipboard labeled Official Hole Permit. The resemblance to Karen was so uncanny, I almost dropped my lemonade. Beside the scarecrow, a handmade sign read, Caution, may claim your land. The crowd around it was roaring with laughter, snapping pictures and swapping Karen stories like old war veterans. I stood there for a long time, soaking it all in. It wasn't about cruelty or revenge. It was about community standing up to entitlement. About people realizing that just because someone shouts the loudest doesn't mean they are right. It was about hard-earned respect, earned not through arrogance but through persistence, patience, and a quiet refusal to back down when it mattered most. Karen was nowhere to be seen at the fair. Word was she had skipped town for a while, maybe to stay with relatives or hide from the fallout. Nobody missed her. Nobody cared. Life went on, better and brighter without the constant dark cloud of her drama hanging overhead. Back at the ranch that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, I sat on the porch and watched the cattle wander back to the barn for the night. The land was quiet again, at peace, and so was I. Sometimes the battles worth fighting aren't the loud, flashy ones. They're the ones where you hold the line quietly, stubbornly, knowing deep down that what you're protecting is bigger than just yourself. It's your history, your future, your home. Karen might have thought she could walk onto my land, plant her flag, and rewrite the rules. But in the end, the land had spoken louder than any laminated badge or clipboard. It had whispered in the rustle of the grass, the creak of the fence posts, the steady beat of hooves on dry earth. It had said, "You do not belong here." And this time, for once, the world had listened. As the weeks turned into months after the dust of the courtroom battles settled, a new kind of life began to bloom around the ranch. It wasn't just the land that had healed, but something inside me too. There was a deeper sense of calm, a steadier kind of pride that came from knowing I had stood my ground not with fists or shouting matches, but with patience, truth, and a stubborn respect for what was right. The mornings felt crisper now, the sunrises more vivid, as if the land itself was relieved to be free from all the chaos that had once trampled across its fields. Life slipped back into an easy rhythm, one that had been missing for too long. The new gate stood as a silent guardian at the entrance to the property, A daily reminder that respect wasn't something that could be demanded with noise or threats, but something earned through time and honesty. The road beyond the gate was freshly graveled, the fences mended and sturdy. My cattle roamed lazily over the fields, their peaceful movements unbroken by the sound of strangers shouting or engines rumbling over the grass. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, I would sit on the porch with a glass of sweet tea in hand and watch the fields stretch out before me, golden and endless under the sun. It felt like a small piece of the world had been set right again. Word had spread far beyond the county about the mess Karen had created and the spectacular way it had backfired. I started receiving calls and letters from neighbors I barely knew, folks who had watched the whole thing unfold from a distance and wanted to offer their support or share a laugh about how it had all turned out. Some even stopped by the ranch in person, dropping off pies, fresh eggs, or just a firm handshake and a story about how they had once dealt with someone just like her. It was strange and humbling, this quiet wave of solidarity. For the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't alone in valuing the old ways of respect and hard work. Karen, on the other hand, had faded almost completely from view. Her house in the HOA community went up for sale just 2 months after the court ruling. A poorly kept secret whispered at the local diner and confirmed when a realtor's sign finally appeared on her perfectly manicured lawn. Rumor had it she was moving to another state, trying to outrun the embarrassment that clung to her like a bad smell. Nobody threw her a farewell party. Nobody even mentioned her name if they could help it. It was as if the town itself was eager to erase her from its story. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves began turning shades of fiery red and gold, I decided to take a walk along the southern edge of the property where the whole mess had started. The grass had grown back thick and healthy where tents had once flattened it. The sprinkler heads I had used to send Karen's army running were hidden once again beneath the green. I smiled to myself as I walked, remembering the look on her face when the cold water had blasted her plans to pieces. It wasn't gloating that filled me, just a deep satisfaction that justice had found its way here without me needing to become something I wasn't. At the far corner of the pasture, where the fence met the old oak tree, I paused. Someone had left something tucked into the crook of the branches. Curious, I stepped closer and found a small wooden plaque, roughly carved but clearly heartfelt. It read, "Respect the land. Respect yourself." No signature, no explanation, just a simple message left behind by someone who understood what the fight had really been about. I stood there for a long time, the cool breeze tugging at my jacket, thinking about everything that had happened. It would have been easy to let anger take over back when Karen first set up her circus on my land. It would have been easy to shout, to fight, to escalate until everyone lost. But instead, patience and persistence had won the day, not because I was smarter or tougher, but because I remembered something Karen had forgotten. The land doesn't bend to loud voices. It doesn't change because someone demands it. It stays true to those who care for it, who fight for it with quiet strength and unwavering respect. That evening, I mounted the plaque on the fence post by the oak tree, a silent guardian watching over the land just like the gate did at the entrance. It felt right to leave it there, a reminder for anyone who passed by that some things aren't for taking, no matter how loudly you shout or how many fake permits you wave in the air. Some things are earned only through time, care, and a deep respect for the stories written into the soil. As the sun dipped low behind the hills and the sky blazed with the colors of a dying day, I made my way back to the ranch house. Buck trotted at my side, tail wagging, nose twitching at the scent of fall. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow across the wooden steps. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and the world settled once again into the soft, steady rhythm that had been its heartbeat long before Karen ever set foot here, and would continue long after her name was forgotten. Sitting on the porch, I watched the stars begin to prick holes in the darkening sky. I thought about the long road it had taken to get here, about the battles fought not with fists, but with patience, not with shouting, but with steadfast truth. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been quick, but it had been worth every step, because in the end, it was never just about fences or fields or property lines. It was about the right to stand on your own land, to hold on to what mattered, to defend the simple, sacred dignity of home. It was about knowing that even when the world gets loud and entitled and full of people who think they can claim whatever they want, there are still places where the old rules hold, where respect matters, where a man and his land are not just legal facts but living truth. And as the last light faded and the stars took over the sky, I smiled to myself, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. The ranch was safe. The land was whole.